This is a copy of the application.
Demanding decisions from the UN. Who will support the Palestinian bid for statehood? How does it change negotiations with Israel? And what, if anything, can be gained from this move? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has decided to go ahead with his application for full UN membership in New York. He's asking the Palestinian territories be recognised as a state based on 1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as its capital. The US says it will veto the bid, proving to many its bias towards Israel and throwing a question mark over its image in the region. Mohammed Shakir has more.
I am convinced that there is no shortcut.
Palestinians know their chances of achieving full United Nations membership are slim. But the bid has attracted the world's attention and challenges the US role as key impartial mediator after 20 years of failed talks with Israel. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas decided to go ahead with the bid on Friday despite threats of immediate ramifications. American politicians have hinted at the possibility of closing the PLO office in Washington and reviewing US aid to Palestinians. But the US also faces fallout. A veto of the Palestinian bid for statehood threatens America's image, especially within the Arab world.
I think the United States loses a great deal. It loses its credibility with the Arab world, first of all, and specifically with the Palestinians. The trend line, if this continues, is very clear. It's the eviction of the United States from the Middle East, in which it still plays the major external role, that is to say, the major external player. I think that's going to be self-defeating for the United States. Unfortunately, it's not going to be terribly good for the Arabs either.
Israel insists that direct negotiations are the only way forward. And one former Israeli foreign minister says the United States is the only country in a position to mediate.
So America remains, in my view, still the indispensable nation when it comes to trying to put international alliances, maybe not monopolize as it did in the past, but yes, create international coalitions in order to push forward the peace process in the Middle East. This is the only country that has the necessary leverage, if it wants to use it, on Israel. The objective of American policy, not necessarily declared objective, needs to be to create a process that will force a change of the political map in Israel, because admittedly with the current coalition it is practically impossible to square the circle between the structure of the coalition and the necessities of the peace process.
Should Abbas's effort at the United Nations Security Council fail, he has another option of going to the United Nations General Assembly. There, the Palestinians are confident they will win enough votes to upgrade to observer status, and so still achieve that crucial recognition of being a state under occupation. Mohammed Shakir for Inside Story.
Okay, to look more at this issue, we're joined today by our guests in Tel Aviv. Zalman Shoval, Israeli politician who served as the Israeli ambassador to the United States between 1990 and 2000. In Jerusalem, Dimitri Diliani, he's a member of the Revolutionary Council of Fatah. And via Skype in New York, Daniel Levy, co-director of the Middle East Task Force at the New America Foundation, also former advisor in the Israeli government. Thank you, gentlemen, all of you, for joining us here on Inside Story today. Ambassador Zalman Shoval, if I can start with you, I want to get an idea of how Israel is planning to respond to this bid by the Palestinians.
Well, I'm not a happy man today because it looks like the Palestinians are once again proving the late Abba Ibn right that they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. I think President Obama called Mr. Abbas's bluff when he said, look, if you want to make progress, if you want to establish a Palestinian state, something which Israel supports as well, if you want to achieve peace for the peoples in the country, you have to negotiate. There's no way around negotiations. But I think Mr. Abbas, I don't want to go into all the reasons because he has his own reasons for that, doesn't really want to negotiate. I think he doesn't want to be put in a situation where he has to make compromises on Jerusalem or the Temple Mount or refugees. And, you know, there have to be compromises on both sides. So he said, let's go straight to the United Nations. Maybe they will impose statehood from above.
Okay.
It doesn't work like that, and I'm afraid we are still in the same rut that we were before.
Dimitri Giuliani, if you can also now just clear up for us whether or not Abbas's bid at the UN replaces negotiations with Israel or acts alongside it.
Not a bit. The move at the UN bid is aimed to basically shake things up and get back to negotiations. Get back to negotiations on the grounds of international law that were mentioned in previous agreements with the State of Israel and now are being denied by the current right-wing extremist government of Israel. So basically, the bid to the UN does not replace by any way, shape, or form negotiations. We do understand that. But we got to a point we're dealing with a lunatic Israeli government that is so pro-colonial settlement activity that is eaten up constantly of the land that we are negotiating on when the Israelis should withdraw from it. And so basically Israel has given us two messages. On one hand, they're saying they are for a two-state solution, and on the other hand, they're eating up the land and gaining more control and annexing in various means this same piece of land that we're supposed to have our land on. We are going to the United Nations to put a stop to that, to reaffirm our rights, and to have the 1967 borders as the recognized borders for whatever agreement we're going to have with the Israelis, which was basically the basis of the Oslo agreement that we had with the Israelis to begin with.
Zalman Shoval, it's a fair point, isn't it? A successful bid at the UN does indeed put both sides on equal playing grounds.
Laura, may I put in a word? Mr. Dimitri mentioned the United Nations and the international law, and he's quite right. But before the Oslo Agreement, there was Resolution 242 of the Security Council of the United Nations after the Six-Day War, which precisely and explicitly said that Israel does not have to withdraw from all the territories, and that they will have, the two sides will have to negotiate a new border which will be security related. And that's really what Israel demands.
Okay, Dimitri, your response to that?
No, I'm sorry. That is, well, he's playing with the words of, you know, there are two versions, the English version and the French version. One says the land that was occupied, the other one says lands that was occupied. But before that, there was a resolution at the United Nations right after the 1948 war that specifically said that anybody that breaks this truce, basically, and enters with military force onto the other side is considered an illegal occupier. That is exactly what Israel did in 1967.
You're right,
After
sir.
that, plus,
who entered Israel
I know
illegally?
I'm right, sir.
The Jordanian army in
know
1967.
Sir,
you're quite right.
Airtime is not Palestinian land that you're trying to chop it up from me. So let me please give my piece, and then you can have all the time that you want. What I'm saying is that international
I'm sorry.
First of all, even the letter, not a problem. The Palestinian state has been talked about ever since 1922 with the mandate, where we were given the classification A, which means that we are ready for statehood. It was given in 1947, UN Resolution 181. It was given in 242. Even the agreements that we have signed with the State of Israel, the letter of recognition from Prime Minister Rabin.
Okay, Dimitri Giuliani, I'm afraid I'm going to jump in at this point because we can spend a long time talking about the history here. And we need to move it forward. We do need to move it forward, and we do have a third guest who we haven't heard from yet. In New York, Daniel Levy. I do want to bring in the US's angle at this point because it's crucial here. It's planning to veto this bid by the Palestinians. This appears to many to be backing Netanyahu's hardline position, thereby losing its credibility as a mediator. Do you think that's a fair point?
Well, if I may, first of all, just comment that I don't fully understand either of the other guests in what we've just heard from them. I think it's hard, in Ambassador Chauval's terms, to credibly see that there is an opportunity or a reason to negotiate when Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that Jerusalem, as Israel defines it, annexing large Palestinian areas, will be Israeli, the Jordan Valley would have Israeli control, continues to build settlements. And I don't really understand, from the perspective of Dimitri, why one would go to the UN just to shake things up in order to return to negotiations. If international law becomes the Palestinian position, then the occupation is illegal, the settlements are illegal, and one should really assert international law rather than want to return to negotiations. In terms of your point, Laura, regarding the United States, I think your viewers are wise enough to understand that the American position has a lot more to do with American domestic politics than it has to do with the substantive merits of the Palestinian appeal to the United Nations or where we stand on the ground with the Israeli-Palestinian situation. So I think that President Obama finds himself in a position where he has been a loyal friend and ally of Israel. He has done so under circumstances far more testing and far more trying for American interests, with what we have seen in the Arab awakening, with a move to Arab democracy. Arab democracy will be far less tolerant of Palestinian disenfranchisement than Arab autocracy was. And despite all of those things, President Obama, should he use the veto, and in opposing not only the Palestinian statehood bid, but really in opposing any reasonable way of moving forward on Israel-Palestine, I think is taking an enormous hit and a risk for American interests.
Okay.
I don't think he's really doing any favors to Israel either.
Okay, well, it is interesting because he is sending some sort of message out to the Arab world. The US is using this veto, its use of the veto to block the Palestinian bid at the Security Council is seen as an unpopular move throughout the Middle East, even amongst some of his closest allies. Just a few days, we had King Abdullah II of Jordan saying that if the US vetoes on the Palestinian bid at the UN vote, the Middle East will have a very negative view towards the United States. And he added that I think Israel is also becoming more and more isolated. So, Daniel Levy, the US really should be concerned at this point in time about its image in the region.
Well, let's also gain some perspective here. President Obama, of course, inherited a very, very difficult legacy from the previous president. The war in Iraq begun on trumped-up grounds. Essentially, America's standing was, of course, at an all-time low, and that isn't something that one was going to change overnight. I think that the president, in his speech in Cairo in 2009, began to turn a new page, began to reset those relations. But since then, I think there's been slippage, and that slip will go further if the president does use the veto. And anyway, by asserting this idea that only through direct negotiations between the parties, when there is such asymmetry between the parties, we have an occupying power and an occupied people, and when America has played the role of exacerbating that symmetry rather than leveling the playing field, I think America is in a very tricky position. But I think most American political commentators will tell you that none of that is likely to become an unmanageable thing for the United States in this immediate coming 14-month period, where the president and his team, understandably, are very focused on the singular goal of re-election. Now, I don't think American Jews really vote on the issue of Israel. I think that's a misunderstanding. The American Jewish community is largely liberal. It doesn't really make Israel the most important issue. They care about the economy like everyone else. But that's the political perception, that one is very boxed in.
I want to move on, keep this moving on. Zalman Chauval, interesting that Israel is appearing to become increasingly isolated in the region. It's lost a major ally in Turkey. Things are on shaky ground in Egypt. Is this a concern that the government should be looking at?
Without any doubt. I mean, we are worried about that. Turkey, of course, is becoming the wild man of the Middle East. It's not just Israel, it's Cyprus, it's perhaps Greece. And we are worried about that, and so should some of our own neighbors, perhaps even some of our Arab neighbors. And the recent events in Egypt are not happy for us. But you know, there are things which are very important for us, which are basic, which are vital, and we hope that in the course of negotiations and of diplomacy, we can alleviate that situation. But we cannot see everything through the prism of whether we are isolated or not. And looking at America, I'm not quite sure that Mr. Levy really gauges correctly American public opinion. As far as I know, as far as I study the situation, American public opinion in general, both on the Democratic side and the Republican side, is squarely in support of Israel's position, which after all is a very logical one. We are a small country. We have been attacked in '67. We defended ourselves. We took hold of those territories as a result of that war. And we don't want to return exactly to that same situation where we may be prone to another aggression. So
what do you make
negotiations,
of the,
by the way, is the only way.
What do you make of the former US President Bill Clinton saying that it is Netanyahu now who stands in the way of peace by not accepting those 1967 borders, by appearing to not want to give up the West Bank? He is clearly putting the onus on Netanyahu to move the goalposts.
I consider Mr. Clinton, President Clinton, a friend, but I think he's wrong on that. And for a man like Netanyahu, who comes from the right of from the Israeli political scene, to make this proposal for a two-state solution is a major departure. Nobody has done it before. I mean, even Mr. Rabin didn't speak about Palestinian state, although that was obviously on the radar screen. And I think I return to what I said before. The Palestinians are missing an opportunity because any agreement they can reach with a center-right government like the present one, with a very pragmatic prime minister like Mr. Netanyahu, has a much better chance to be accepted by the Israeli public than by a left-leaning government, perhaps in the future.
Dimitri Giuliani, Netanyahu, a pragmatic prime minister. What do you make of that?
Yeah, this is probably the joke of the day. Netanyahu is not by any means pragmatic. He's sly. He knows how to manipulate people. He knows how to trick his own people. But it is absolutely not the best interest of the Middle East or even the Israeli people, which I'm not in position to speak about, that what he's doing. Benjamin Netanyahu has basically killed the peace process, a man that publicly was opposed to the peace agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and now he's achieving his goals after 20 years. He's been clear about it, and there is nothing pragmatic about that. And if we look around him at the team that is around him, we get somebody like Lieberman, who is a Russian immigrant living outside the borders of State of Israel, but still serves as its foreign minister, defending settlers, coming up with these racist, fascist ideas all the time, and still being accepted by somebody that your guest calls pragmatic. This is just nonsense. It doesn't make really sense at all.
Okay, Daniel Levy, you were a special advisor under Ehud Barak's government. Do you believe that Israel and the Palestinian territories were closer to a settlement then than they are now?
Undoubtedly, one was closer. I think there was some serious and productive negotiations, especially after President Clinton, who we were just discussing, introduced his parameters in December of 2000. But I think we've moved a long way since then. This is over a decade ago. I'm not sure that same package is still possible to take seriously. Both publics have lost hope. There are demographic changes and political changes on the Israeli side. There are changes in the reality on the ground. And of course, which we've just been referring to, there are now dramatic changes in the region. I see the ability of Egypt to move towards a more representative enfranchisement of its citizens as a positive, not a negative, even if one will go through convulsions. But I think one has to understand that the Egyptian public, if they have more of a say, will not put up quite so easily with the indignity of the Palestinian situation. I think democratic Turkey shows that the region, once public opinion is given its say, is going to be far less patient with this situation. And I think Israel needs to think long and hard about that. The Palestinian state that is apparently on offer from Prime Minister Netanyahu, I mean, if you want to take 40% of truncated, isolated Palestinian islands in the West Bank. If the Palestinians want to put a flag on that and call it a state, that's their business. I don't think it will find popularity amongst their general public, but I don't think much more than that is on offer. I think one of the interesting things we'll be looking at, Laura, in the coming days is whether they choose to assert the option of enhancing their recognition at the General Assembly in addition to going to the Security Council, and that is a vote that would bring in all 193 member states of the UN, and I think that would give us a sense of where the balance of world opinion is.
Indeed. Dimitri Giuliani, there's certainly a lot of support throughout the world for Palestinian statehood. The world has changed with the Arab Spring. Do you think the US has lost its relevance as a mediator here?
I think that the speech of President Obama in the United Nations was a resignation speech from the leadership of the world. President Obama, due to domestic political issues, has chose to disengage from reality, disengage from truth, and therefore has resigned. And now there will be, due to the Arab Spring and Arab revolutions and changing realities on the ground, and less tolerant Arab revolutions of Israeli criminal practices and U.S. supporting it, there will be a gap. And this gap could easily be filled by Europe, by China, by Russia. But again, this is a choice that was made by the U.S. president, and this is the discourse that he chose to take. But there's one thing that Zalman has mentioned about the difficulties of implementing previous ideas that things were changed on the ground. There have been changes on the ground. And that is exactly why we insist on stopping colonial settlements, because there are facts on the ground. There are unilateral moves, there are criminal moves, they happen on the ground, they change facts on the ground. So after a while, there'll be the reason why we could not have our state, as they are a major obstacle now. That's why the President Abbas, insists on stopping illegal colonial settlement activities in Palestinian land occupied in 1967. And that's why we're going to the United Nations, because this is one of the ways that we can get to that period where we can stop it, since the U.S. has withdrawn and been incapable of pressuring Israel to stop this illegal activity.
Salman Shoval, obviously you have the U.S.'s support at the UN. How concerned will you be if the UK, the French, the Germans all vote in favour of the Palestinians?
Well, let's wait. Let's wait and see. Of course, we would be concerned, but I don't expect this to happen. I mean, there's a certain sense of morality amongst the Europeans. They understand their responsibility towards peace, towards settlement, towards Israel, towards the Jewish people. I don't want to engage in terminology like criminal, like Mr. Giuliani just mentioned. I could have spoken about terrorism and so on and so forth. I'm not going to do that. But I think that we shouldn't sell America short. America is still the #1 superpower in this world. There are quite a few Arab countries which depend on America, and America has interests in this part of the world. But let's leave America aside. Let's leave the UN aside. The only way to reach anything in business, in private life, in politics, is by negotiating. And as the late Moshe Dayan said at the time, the Palestinians will be surprised how generous Israel can be and will be.
OK, all right, clearly two very differing views over the way to move forward on negotiations. Daniel Levy, just very briefly from you, can there be any winners from this move at the UN?
I think the United States is clearly going to be a loser. I would agree with Ambassador Shoval that we're not going to transition away from US monopoly on this peace process so quickly, but that is clearly the direction we are going in. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu may allow himself a little smile if this gets stuck at the Security Council, if it doesn't go to the General Assembly, and if it doesn't succeed at the Security Council, which it won't. But I don't think Israel can be a winner here. I think realism is needed in Israel, and we've not heard that from the Israeli government. If they have a great surprise to reveal to the Palestinians in negotiations, I would strongly recommend that they put that surprise on the table now, perhaps even very soon.
Okay.
The Palestinians.
Indeed. I'm going to have to cut you off there, Daniel. I'm sorry for that. We have run out of time. It's certainly going to be a discussion for the coming weeks and indeed months, possibly years. Thank you very much to our guests today for joining us. In Tel Aviv, Zalman Shoval. In Jerusalem, Dimitri Dilyani. And in New York, Daniel Levy. And thank you too for joining us here for this edition of Inside Story. As ever, we welcome your comments, suggestions. Do email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.